There are moments in Coronation Street that seem small at first glance. A different hairstyle. A quiet decision. A single look across a room. But sometimes, those moments say more than an entire explosive argument ever could. And tonight Coronation Street delivered exactly that. Because Betsy Swain walked onto the cobbles looking like a completely different person, and fans instantly knew this was about far more than hair. Something has changed inside her. And after everything she's endured recently, that change could alter her future forever. Welcome back to Coronation Street Update, your home for the biggest Corrie breakdowns, emotional theories, and all the drama unfolding on the cobbles. And trust us, tonight's episode may have looked subtle on the surface. But emotionally, it was one of the most revealing chapters we've seen in weeks. Because while the murder investigation surrounding Theo Silverton continues tearing lives apart in the background, another story quietly took center stage. A story about identity, about trauma, and about a young woman trying desperately to reclaim control of herself after witnessing something horrifying. And that's where Betsy comes in. The second she appeared on screen tonight, viewers immediately noticed it. The blonde hair was gone. In its place, dark brunette locks that completely transformed her appearance. The reaction online was instant. Fans flooded social media in shock, disbelief, excitement, and curiosity. Some loved the change. Others were stunned by how different she suddenly looked. But almost everyone asked the exact same question. Why no? Because in soap operas, transformations like this rarely happen by accident. Especially not after trauma. And that's what makes this storyline so emotionally fascinating. For months, Betsy has existed in the shadow of chaos. Between her connection to DS Lisa Swain and the horrifying discovery of Theo Silverton's body, she has been dragged into emotional territory no young person should ever have to navigate. She didn't just witness a tragedy. She absorbed it. And you can see the psychological aftershock all over her recent behavior. That's what made tonight's episode so compelling. Not because of screaming matches. Not because of massive twist. But because the emotional storytelling felt deeply human. The new hair almost felt symbolic. Like Betsy is trying to separate herself from the frightened version of herself that found Theo. Trying to regain ownership over her identity before the investigation consumes everyone around her. But then everything changes. Because the episode doesn't allow Betsy to fully escape the darkness surrounding the street. Instead, it places her directly into another emotionally charged situation involving Dylan Wilson and Leanne Battersby at Speed Doll. And suddenly the atmosphere shifts again. Leanne offers both Dylan and Betsy a trial shift. One job. Two vulnerable young people. Immediately the tension becomes uncomfortable. Because this wasn't really about employment. It was about survival. About who needed hope more. And underneath the surface, you could feel both characters carrying completely different emotional burdens. Dylan looked desperate for stability. Betsy looked exhausted from carrying emotional weight she hasn't fully processed. What happens next is surprisingly powerful. Because despite impressing Leanne during the shift, Betsy steps back. She gives Dylan the opportunity instead. And honestly, that moment may have revealed more about her emotional state than any dramatic monologue could. This is where the writing became incredibly smart. Older versions of Betsy may have fought harder. Pushed harder. Needed validation. But tonight's Betsy felt different. Quieter. More reflective. Almost emotionally older. And that creates a fascinating psychological question moving forward. Is Betsy becoming stronger after trauma? Or is she beginning to emotionally detach from the world around her? Because there's a huge difference between maturity and numbness. And Coronation Street may deliberately be blurring that line. Meanwhile, hanging over the entire episode like a storm cloud, is the Theo Silverton murder investigation itself. And this is where the emotional pressure on every character becomes impossible to ignore. 6 suspects. 6 fractured lives. 6 people slowly being consumed by fear, grief, pressure, and suspicion. Todd Grimshaw. George Shuttleworth. Gary Windass. Summer Spellman. Christina Boyd. Danielle Silverton. Every single name carries emotional consequences. And now Summer's situation has become even more devastating. Tonight, viewers watched as she revealed she was being transferred to prison because police believe she murdered Theo. Just imagine the psychological terror of that moment. Being isolated. Being judged. being trapped inside a nightmare you cannot escape from. And the emotional ripple effect of that accusation is hitting everyone connected to the case. Especially Todd. Because Todd's relationship to this entire situation feels increasingly tragic. Every conversation he has now carries emotional exhaustion underneath it. Every interaction feels heavy. And that emotional heaviness is beginning to infect the entire street. But that may not be the whole truth. Because the real brilliance of this storyline right now is that the murder mystery almost functions like background radiation. It's always there. Always poisoning the atmosphere. Even in scenes that appear calmer on the surface. Even in moments about hair transformations and job opportunities. The fear never fully leaves. And that's why Betsy's reinvention tonight mattered so much. It felt like someone attempting to emotionally survive inside an environment where nobody feels safe anymore. And fans are already building theories around it. Some viewers believe the darker hair represents a more mature chapter for Betsy. Others think the writers are subtly preparing her for a much bigger role in the Theo aftermath storyline. And some fans are wondering whether the trauma she experienced could fundamentally change her relationships moving forward, especially with Lisa Swain. Because let's be honest, children growing up around constant emotional chaos eventually start changing in ways even they don't fully understand. And Coronation Street has always been strongest when it explores that kind of quiet emotional evolution. Not explosions. Transformation. The kind that happens slowly. Painfully. Almost invisibly. Until one day you suddenly realize somebody is no longer the person they used to be. And tonight, that's exactly what happened with Betsy Swain. This episode also subtly reminded viewers of something important. Sometimes the most powerful character development doesn't arrive through massive speeches or shocking twists. Sometimes it arrives through restraint. Through silence. Through a young woman changing her appearance because emotionally she no longer recognizes the version of herself staring back in the mirror. That is powerful storytelling. And Sydney Martin deserves enormous credit here because her performance carried an understated emotional realism throughout the episode. She made Betsy feel vulnerable without making her weak. Changed without becoming unrecognizable. And in a storyline full of murder accusations, police pressure and emotional instability, that grounded performance stood out beautifully. But where does this all go next? That's the big question. Will Betsy continue distancing herself emotionally from the trauma surrounding Theo's death? Could she become more deeply involved in the investigation despite trying to move forward? And what happens if the real killer is finally exposed while these characters are already emotionally hanging by a thread? Because one truth is becoming impossible to ignore. The Theo storyline is no longer just about solving a murder. It's about watching an entire community emotionally reshape itself under pressure. And some people may not survive that transformation unchanged. So what did you think about brunette Betsy's debut tonight? Do you think the transformation symbolizes emotional healing, or emotional damage? Was giving Dylan the job a sign of maturity, or is Betsy quietly losing her sense of purpose? And who do you believe is hiding the biggest secret in the Theo investigation right now? Drop all your theories, reactions and predictions down below because Corrie fans always spot details nobody else notices. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another dramatic update from the cobbles. Because if tonight proved anything, it's that sometimes the quietest changes create the loudest consequences. In this story, it's only getting started.